Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The ceasefire in Syria, brokered by the United States and Russia, appears to be holding after the first 24 hours. But the UN has yet to deliver aid because of security concerns, it says. Central to this ceasefire deal is the targeting of al-Nusra and other jihadi groups by US and Russian warplanes. But what is the mechanism for coordinating military action when time and again, in events reminiscent of the Cold War, there appear to be thinly veiled acts of aggression between the two? Most recently, the news from the Pentagon that last week a Russian fighter jet flew within 10 feet of a US Navy spy plane over the Black Sea. So how is it going to work? Sakunda Kamani reports.
The aftermath of a Russian airstrike in Syria last year. They've been accused of repeatedly targeting American-backed rebels more than ISIS.
On the deck, below the bridge wing.
As tensions rose between the two powers, Russian jets buzzed US warships and planes in the Baltic. In June, Russia even bombed this military camp in Syria, used by moderate rebels. Russia said they thought it was an ISIS camp, but just 24 hours earlier, US Special Forces and the SAS had been there. Now, in a major turnaround, America and Russia are committing to work together in Syria. If the ceasefire continues to hold for a week, they will establish a Joint Intelligence Committee, or JIC, to coordinate attacks against the jihadist group formerly known as al-Nusra.
We're trying to take Assad's air forces out of the equation. That's the goal here. And if we get there, then we can have coordination between the US and Russia, deciding what targets are legitimate targets, Nusra targets, and then agreement on who hits those targets.
I've been speaking to a senior American official about what military cooperation with the Russians might look like. He said they've already got a small team talking to their Russian counterparts, but that there would be no shared command center, and that joint sorties between the two would be extremely unlikely because of high levels of mistrust. What would happen is a sharing of lists of potential targets in Syria that each one could veto. But he added the Americans are conscious this could appear as if they're intervening on the side of the regime. Assad's air force will not be allowed to operate in areas where the Americans and Russians are working together to target Nusra. But they won't be totally grounded, and the US is relying on Russia to persuade him not to bomb other rebels. The agreement is a concern for many, like this advisor to the Syrian opposition.
I think it's very hard to see how anyone can trust the Russians. They've committed war crime after war crime after war crime in Syria. I don't think they even frankly have the equipment to target people effectively. They don't have smart bombs, and certainly don't have a lot of them. So it seems to me that it's very worrying to work with the Russians when they're not capable of targeting people. And what I would say is that what we need to do before we work with the Russians is first to make clear what the consequences of violations are.
Russian intervention has been a game changer, but they don't want their troops dying in Syria and do want to boost their international standing.
Russians believe Russia to be a natural ally of the United States. And what was really problematic for the Russians over the past 25 years was to kind of to realize that Russia was not seen as a natural ally, but as a problem, as a spoiler. Russia was called all those names, you know, adversary. Recently we heard from some American politicians.
The communists had showered the HQ and surrounding area with rockets and mortar bombs.
Conflict and rivalry between America and Russia has defined the modern era, with tensions between the two still very much present.
There have been many efforts before for the two countries to work together. Even before the end of the Cold War, there have been joint efforts, for instance, to identify missing Russian soldiers in Afghanistan. There has been a cooperation between Russia and the United States in the first Gulf War in the early 1990s. But there has never been a level of cooperation of this kind. It's peculiar because it's exactly at the time when actually relations between the two powers could not have been at a lower level.
Russian-backed soldiers have lined up along a key road into Aleppo that's turned into a demilitarized zone. America says if the deal with its old foe turns out just to boost the Assad regime, they'll pull out of it. But it could be this administration's last chance at securing some stability.
Sekunda Kamani. Well, a short while ago, I spoke to Philip Gordon, who until last year was the president's most senior advisor on the Middle East and the Syrian conflict. I started by asking exactly how the deal between Russia and the US would work if the ceasefire holds.
There are a lot of questions about how this is going to work, and obviously you can't even assume we get to that point, because to get to that point you need 7 days of calm, and there will be parties on the ground that have an interest in disrupting that calm. But the idea is, if you can begin the part in which the United States and Russia work together, the reality is that both the United States and Russia do have a common list of enemies, adversaries, as you mentioned, the Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda affiliate that used to be called the Nusra Front. So there may be some disputed targets that they can't agree on, but there would nonetheless be some, in fact, a substantial number of targets that they can agree on. And in Syria these days, you can never have everything, but if you get something, then that's better than nothing. And I think that's what, that's the category this would be in.
But if Russian strikes and American strikes do their job and neutralize, or IS particularly, essentially they're doing Assad's job for him, because there's no sign that Assad will be out of power. There's no plan to remove Assad from power. Assad wins in the end if these strikes work.
This deal is about moving from the current all-out civil war with Assad still in power, barrel bombing the opposition, refugees and all the rest, to a middle state, which is at least a ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and Assad no longer doing that. It admittedly doesn't take you all the way to the desired end state, which is a political transition and Assad goes. The reality is on that, Kirsty, no one has a realistic plan for getting to that state anytime soon. And so it is a question of can you at least make things better, in fact, much better, while accepting the reality that for now, you don't have a plan to get Assad out of power.
But do you think that President Obama should have hit Assad when he used chemical weapons on his own people?
I think once we had made clear, once the United States had made clear that there would be consequences, including military consequences, for killing nearly 2,000 people with chemical weapons, that it was important to follow up on that. But I want to be clear on that, because I think it's important for everyone to understand that that would not have been some magical solution to this war. That would have been a way, if it worked, of deterring Assad from using chemical weapons. It would not have led him to fall from power. It would not have brought moderates or Democrats to power. It would have been, I think, an important thing to do, but it would not have resolved this situation in the way people now talk about it somehow, as if the United States had conducted, a weekend worth of airstrikes. That would have solved this problem.
But now we're in a situation
he still would have been.
Sorry, excuse me. Now we're in a situation where President Obama's got less than 60 days effectively to run. It just looks like a rush to do something about a legacy.
I don't think that's fair. I mean, I think the administration has been working for some time. Indeed, the first version of this was last February, a ceasefire that actually did hold for some time, and unfortunately, tragically, it didn't stick. But I think it's not about, getting something to not look so bad before he leaves power. It is about stopping what is really a horrific situation and saving lives.
But we might be in a situation where a new White House administration would do something completely different.
That's true, and that's obviously going to be a major challenge for the next administration. Either way, I mean, if this doesn't hold, obviously we're back to square one, the horrific situation that we're dealing with. But even if it somehow does, Syria is still unresolved, and there are huge questions about how you get a political transition, even if somehow you get a ceasefire. And, you know, being perfectly honest, nobody has any easy answers for that. I don't know anyone who thinks that there is a new administration that is going to be able to just come in and dictate the results and get rid of Assad and put moderates in power. Whether it's this administration or the next administration working with all our partners in the region, I'm afraid that Syria and the Syria problem is going to be with us for many months and years to come.
Philip Gordon, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
I've been getting away